Hey, it's me, Rose La Fabiloca, and we are going to take down white supremacy, one pendejo at a time. This is the Ya Tu Sabe podcast. Such a funky song. Hi, mi gente. ¿Cómo están todos ustedes? Wow, what a week it has been. I hope you all enjoyed my 4th episode Friday night special, where we had a short week in review of some viral content from all corners of the internet. Let me know if you enjoyed that segment and if I should keep it as part of my roster. This weekend has been the best, you guys. We celebrated my nephew's 4th birthday, and it was a nice break to unplug from social media and recharge with my family. It was just amazing. So I have long anticipated this topic today, this portion of my podcast. I mean, for me, and being that it is so complex, I wanted to warn you guys to take aspirin, ibuprofen/Advil now, because it's going to be a bit confusing for those who know close to nothing about Hispanics or who maybe know minimal amounts. But don't you worry, you will have a solid foundation once this is over. You see, we are going to be talking about a lot of Hispanic-oriented social issues like racism in our community, colorism, caste systems, misogyny, Hispanic and Black relations, and on and on. But in order for you guys to understand those conversations, I need you to come into the podcast informed. I know a lot of Hispanic people will think they know everything just by the title, but I want to encourage you to give a listen anyway, because you might fall into a category of people who've been misled about certain things when it comes to certain terms. So we really have no time to waste with my announcements and such, so let's hop right into this Hispanic tea. Short disclaimer, I want you guys to know that I absolutely adore my culture. I love everything about being Hispanic, and I wouldn't trade it in for anything in the world. I love our food, music, dancing, love, family ties, and traditions, but every community has their burdens to bear, and I felt it was important to give voice to a people who are often left in the shadows or sometimes forced to join sides. Especially in times like these, I just hope this podcast can help give a better point of view to those who are not Hispanic, and perhaps give them a better grasp at why we are the way that we are. And if you already feel that you know a ton, you probably are going to learn something new today anyway. I pretty much guarantee it. So just take a listen. All right, so let's begin. Now, I know Hispanic and Latino are often used interchangeably to refer to groups of people that speak Spanish or are from, Latin American countries. But did you guys know that these terms are actually not interchangeable at all? The modern American term for Latino refers to people in the United States, that's important, in the United States, with cultural ties to Latin America, to which speak Latin-derived Romance languages. Latin America in this definition is referred to South America, Mexico, Central America, and the islands of the Caribbean, to which all speak Spanish, which is a Romance language. The major languages of the Romance language family include French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Now, historically, the term Latino to Italians would more often than not refer to the ancient language Latino, to which many other languages derived from, including Portuguese, Spanish, French, Romanian, etc., the ones that I just mentioned. It is said that the Italian language is almost similar to Latin, since it developed exactly where the Romans originally were. Referring to people of Hispanic descent as Latinos was an American misappropriation of the word, but as the Hispanic people eventually assimilated and accepted it, the origin of that phrase has gone basically erased in the United States, which is unfortunate because that is basically the US erasing a portion of Italian history, which they shouldn't just be able to do. But as we've often learned in this podcast, the US government likes to do whatever the fuck it wants, okay? Italians are not Latinos according to the current American use of this word. But any Italian descendants from multiple generations belonging to the Lazio region are the real Latins according to the original meaning of the term. So if we're just following what the current American use of the word means, it is not interchangeable with the word Hispanic because you see, Brazilians, for example, are considered Latino, but they are not Hispanic because they don't speak Spanish, they speak Portuguese, which is derived from Latin, making them Latinos. So, because the US government decided to name us Latinos and classify us also as Hispanic, in current times many people refer to their ethnic group as Hispanic/Latino in America because of the census. So, any Spanish-speaking person living in the United States who is of Latin American descent is a Hispanic. So recapping, we've covered what a Latino actually is, and what a Hispanic actually is, and what a Latinx actually is. So what about Hispanic versus Spanish? If you're Hispanic, this is simple enough. We get it, but a lot of people don't. We learned that Hispanic refers to a Spanish-speaking person of Latin American descent. Well, Spanish is language spoken by the people of Spain, because the Spaniards colonized these Hispanic countries over the course of several centuries. These countries were forced to change their language from their indigenous Indian language to speak Spanish, thus why we all speak Spanish to this day. The word Hispanic, when you really break it down to what it actually is and its history, is really just a term used to describe a group of countries with the same shared experience of colonization and racial mixing, and a shared language because of this. Hispanic first appeared on the census in 1970. Before then, Hispanic and Latino people were classified as white and by their country of origin. Grassroots activists and Spanish language broadcasters spearheaded the campaign to make Hispanic a widely used term, but for different reasons. Activists thought this new categorization would lead to more political visibility and funding for groups often overlooked by the government, which is why it's very important that you fill out the census, because this is how we have representation. Spanish language broadcasters, however, were looking to sell advertising to a broader category of Spanish speakers in the US, rather than just the small markets of Puerto Rico or Cuban Americans. But they needed a name for that larger audience. In subsequent census, Spanish language broadcasters Univision aggressively campaigned to encourage people to mark themselves as Hispanic. So we went over, Hispanic. That's kind of the gist of the history behind Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and Spanish. So you don't call someone from Mexico Spanish. Someone from Mexico speaks Spanish because of Spain colonization, but the only people who should be referred to as Spanish is people who are from Spain. So anyone else who's not from Spain that is speaking Spanish is a Hispanic because of the shared experience of being colonized by Spain. So let's discuss Afro-Latino. Now, we already covered that technically Latino should refer to the Italian people, but because the US government has used this term to refer to people that are of Latin American descent, we're going to play along, okay? Afro-Latino refers to Latinos of African descent. They can be Black or the numerous admixture one finds in Latin America everywhere. The term usually refers to those of African descent living in Hispanic countries or countries of South Central America and the Caribbean that speak Spanish. Now, think of Afro-Latino as a subcategory of the category Hispanic Latino. Afro-Latino has gained a lot of traction in the last couple decades because people that refer to themselves as Afro-Latino/Latina that live in America also tend to identify with the African American community due to their African roots and physical features, especially in a country like America where race and race identification has been such an integral factor in determining who has rights and who does not. This is why a lot of Afro-Latinos embrace that term. Now, personally, I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to put up a picture of an example, two examples of well-known Afro-Latinas in popular culture that might help you guys just kind of visualize maybe someone you've come across in your life that you're like, oh, I didn't know that you were Hispanic. A lot of times these women and men are in social groups and people just assume that they're Black and they're actually Hispanic. So while Afro-Latinos and Latinas are just as Hispanic and Latino as anyone else of any skin color, they also identify as Black, as being Black has played a large part in their own identity and experience as they move through life, especially, like I said, in America, where we've had a lot of race issues. It's hard for them to live their lives and not identify with being Black because they are. You will see that although there are people who identify as Afro-Latino, there aren't many, if at all, that refer to themselves as Euro-Latinos, for like white Latinos. Do you ever wonder why that is? Well, the closest term that is being recognized within communities now is the term white Latina, which again is another term that was given to our community by other people. None of us identify ourselves as white Latinos or Euro-Latinos because we have no ties to Europe outside of the colonization in our ancestry. When Hispanics came here in mass amounts in the 60s, things are about proximity, okay? And this is something about knowing history and nuance that you guys have to understand. Someone might think, well, how can a Latino refer to themselves as Afro-Latino, but then a white-looking Latino wouldn't refer to themselves as a white Latino? Like, why would that be the case? Well, when Hispanics got here, it wasn't like we assimilated into the white community. The white community did not want us involved in their shit. They were very much like, no Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, we don't want that shit in our community. So when projects were created and communities were created to force Black people away from white neighborhoods, they also shoved up Hispanics into that group. So you have to understand, especially proximity. We, as Hispanics, we've had more proximity, especially in urban cities, to Black people and Black culture than we have to white people and white culture, which is another kind of nuance that goes into why people have arguments with Hispanics, why Black people will say Hispanics are not allowed to use the N-word, and then there's Black people who will say Hispanics can use the N-word if they're from New York. There's all this, whenever there's an argument about the N-word, Hispanics are the first people that are called out because they do use the term a lot. And the reason why that is because especially in a place like New York City, in the Bronx, where projects were created to keep us together and to keep us out of white neighborhoods, that struggle, that culture, that entire history there was a shared experience with Hispanics that Black people had. So we are a lot more in proximity to them. And so if you have someone who's a Black Latina or Afro-Latina, of course she would identify more with Black people and Black culture because as Hispanics, we also have been, segregated in a lot of ways. We have been had a lot of situations with prejudice and racism and being outcasted. So it's a very sense of pride to identify yourself as Afro-Latino. It's not so much a sense of pride to identify yourself as a Euro-Latina or a white Latino. That's not really, we don't do that. Especially, you don't really hear Hispanics say, I'm a Euro-Latina, I'm a white Latina. That's not how I introduce myself. I say I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican, I identify with the country of origin, not what my skin color is. And when we are talking about Afro-Latino or people are throwing around the term white Latinas, whatever, what I need for people and what the Hispanic community needs from people to understand is that in the Hispanic community, we do not operate, like in the islands, for example, they do not operate under the same obsession with the terms of race. Like in America, racially profiling, racially categorizing people is an obsession practically. In this country, it is very important to people to identify your race, to identify yourself so that they can understand who you are. But when you live in the islands, for example, or you live in El Salvador, like everyone there is Salvadoran. It doesn't matter if you're black or white or Asian or Middle Eastern, whoever's there, the people who live there, who have grown up there, who are from there, they just identify as whatever country they're from. You see, it's important to understand that each Hispanic country and region has their own food, dance, traditions, religion, etc. The only thing that really unites us together to make up the, quote, Hispanic community is that we all share the same language and history of colonization, like I said. Because of this, as time has continued on, we've moved to places like America where we met other people from other Spanish-speaking nations, where we formed a Hispanic community that treats one another as a single family unit. This is why you will see many people confuse Mexicans with Puerto Ricans or Caribbean music with Mexican music, even though both genres sound completely different from one another. We are united by our histories and language to form one large community. And while this is a beautiful thing, Americans and their disinterest in getting to know us and who we really are, rather than their labels for us, have lost sight of the fact that there are more Hispanic countries than just Mexico or Puerto Rico. There's the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Cuba, Uruguay, Paraguay, and the list goes on and on. Making Mexico the representative of all of the Hispanic community would be like making the Chinese the representatives of all Asian countries, completely overlooking Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, etc. It's just a gross generalization that we need to spend more effort toward getting away from as we try to move toward a more truly diverse society. If we want to really actually embrace diversity, we need to respect the fact that everyone is from their own independent countries. And just because the government is using terms to categorize us doesn't mean that that's all there is to know about those individual people. And because of all these labels and confusion, I'm going to have an episode regarding the idea of, am I Hispanic enough? Are you Hispanic enough? And all that kind of issue that we have going on in our community, but that's for a later episode. Right now, I'm laying the groundwork, you guys, so you can understand what we even are to begin with, because a lot of people are not able to understand our social issues because of the fact that they don't know who we even are or what we even are in the first place. So now it's time to attack ethnicity versus race, okay? Race, as defined by the United States standards, describes a person's physical characteristics, such as bone structure and skin, hair, or eye color. Ethnicity, however, refers to the cultural factors, including nationality, regional culture, ancestry, and language. And nationality refers to one's birthright or citizenship. Now, for a long time in the United States, they recognize Hispanic as an ethnicity but not a race, even still to this day. So the only options they give us are between white, black, American Indian, Asian, Pacific Islander, or being mixed, meaning two or more races. The other day I took a poll on my Instagram asking you guys what it is you believe I identify as on my official paperwork. And 82% of you believe I identify as black, while 18% of you believe I identify as white. Well, the real answer is neither. I'm going to explain to you why. This is the official government definition of white, okay? Because there's a lot of people who would expect me to be white, or if they saw me on the street would refer to me as a white Latina. So let me just read you the official definition of what the government says is a category of whites and why I do not identify myself as just white. White, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. It includes people who indicate their race as white or report entries such as Irish, German, Italian, Lebanese, Arab, Moroccan, or Caucasian. So this definition is so flawed because if you really break it down, they're even expecting for Middle Eastern people that are Arab or Moroccan, etc., to identify their race as white. But when we look at Middle Eastern people, oftentimes, they also come in many different shades. So this is a really important podcast episode, you guys, because this extends far beyond Hispanics, okay? This entire episode really speaks to the bicultural experience of being both American and being from another country or another group of peoples. And the fact that this government insists that we are to categorize ourselves in such a limited way, you know, it totally erases the real sense of diversity. You know what I mean? Because if I'm having to opt myself as white, I have no connection to Europe or the Middle East or North Africa, and people from the Middle East have no connections personally with Europe either themselves. If you're from Afghanistan, would you be like, oh, let me identify myself as white? You know what I'm saying? And I understand that the definition is based off of, you know, your physical characteristics, but the reality is that the entire concept of race is truly a social construct. So let's think about that shit, okay? Let's think about the shit. Because while I do not necessarily opt for either white or black because I am of mixed race, if I'm applying to something that's giving me the option of only picking between like white and black and not giving me the two or other mixed option, which I've seen in like job applications and stuff like that, the ones who 82% of you who said that I opt as black are actually correct, okay? This is why. In the definition of black or African American, they include Haiti in that definition. And Dominican Republic and Haiti share the same island. So it's like you're going to tell, and the Haitians were colonized by the French, so another group of white people. So you're going to tell me that the people that live on the same island, who are exposed to the same sun, who have been exposed to the same form of colonization, half of the island is expected in America to identify as black because they're Haitian, and the other half of the island is supposed to identify as white because they're Dominican and they could be light-skinned. That's ridiculous. It makes no sense. These definitions do not make any sense. Why? Because race is a social construct, and it is such a generalization of these groups of peoples that are not white or black that it literally makes no sense. So why should I opt myself to identify as Caucasian when I have no connection whatsoever with that? I have more connection with Haitians than I do with white people. So I am not going to identify myself as white. And this is why I understand we're in a place right now in America where there is white privilege, and the closer to white privilege that you are, the more in proximity you are to privilege, the more responsibility you have to conduct yourself in a way to help with these social issues. I completely understand that, and you guys know I'm out here doing just that. However, we are not going to, and I will not allow for society to wash away my entire cultural identity because of their obsession with race and racism. So if given the option on paperwork, I identify as two or more races because I am a Hispanic of Caribbean island descent, specifically Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. So Puerto Ricans and Dominicans are a mix of native, Taino, Indian, European, and African ancestry. And this fact is why when you meet a Hispanic and ask them what they are, they won't tell you I'm Hispanic or I'm Latino. Oftentimes they'll say I'm Mexican or I'm Salvadorian or I'm Puerto Rican, because we identify by our country of origin, which tells each other who understand in our own community exactly what we need to know about them. Because Central American Hispanics have a much different viewpoint of many things than, for example, Caribbean Hispanics, okay? We don't care about the terms Latino, Hispanic, okay? If anything, I think that Americans care more about those labels than we actually do. So as far as race goes, I identify myself as a mixed race person or just black. I do not know exactly what percentages of what that I am. I just know I have cousins, aunts and uncles who are anywhere from pale to dark skin and everywhere in between. And we all come from the same lineages. Therefore, I couldn't tell you specifics unless I did an ancestry test. And even then, I already know it's going to tell me I'm a mixed person. So what's really the point? You know what I mean? In social circles, I just identify myself as my countries of origin, but I never deny or hesitate to embrace my African ancestry, despite what a lot of people want to say about Dominican people. The color of our skin shows how much our people have been through, and I've never felt the need to shy away from that. Therefore, I'm a mixed person of European, African, and Taino Indian ancestry. But if you really want to know where my identity is carved out, it's in my countries of origin. Now, as far as my nationality goes, of course, I was born in Queens, New York City, so I am also American, which leads me to my last point, which is that on top of the confusing categories and labels Americans put on Hispanics with, we also are people who are bicultural and in some cases multicultural. In this aspect, I feel that I am a bicultural person who both was raised by my Hispanic culture, but also has always identified with Black American culture rather than standard American culture or white culture. And this is why I believe so many people voted on my poll that I identify as Black, because they know culturally I am very leaned into the Black community and Black issues and identify with them more than any other racial group in America today. So lastly, to close this out, let's talk about transracial. A lot of people might hear what I'm saying and feel that I am a transracial person. This is not the case, and I'll tell you why. First of all, being Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnicity. Second of all is, look at the case of Rachel Dolezal, however you say her name. She is a white woman who identifies herself as Black. And her definition of transracial, her lifestyle, is destructive because the politics of race and gender are not interchangeable in this context of transracial. Unlike many Black Americans, Rachel Dolezal's family does not carry the trauma of slavery and institutionalized racism, okay? So this is why it is very, this is why you can't just simply identify yourself as some other race just because you like them better. That's not how it works. And that's not how it works for me either. But being Hispanic, I actually have African ancestry, and the only reason why I have European ancestry is because Europeans came to our islands, raped, killed people, and gave them disease. So this is why I have European ancestry in me. This is also why I have African ancestry, because Europeans brought Africans to the slave ports in the Dominican Republic, for example. And this is where you had racial mixing, cultural mixing, etc. So on top of that historical context, people in the Dominican Republic were also enslaved, and people all over the islands of Hispaniola were enslaved as well. So there are also a lot of traumas with colorism, racism, and institutionalized racism and systemic racism that Hispanics have also been subject to because of the way that America treats the Black people, and because we also have Black people in our culture. So naturally, we blur those lines a bit in our case, whereas those lines are not blurred for white people. If you're Caucasian, if you're from freaking Germany or something, you can't just be like, identify as Black. That's not how it works. So given all of this, Hispanic people and Black people have a shared experience with white supremacy. And by forcing light-skinned Latinas to identify themselves as white is just as disrespectful as it is to tell light-skinned Black people to identify themselves as white. Because the reality is that we look the way that we look because of colonization and all that went on during that time. And the realness of it all, to be 1,000% real, is the Taino people are extinct because of Europeans, so if that didn't happen, I probably would look a lot more indigenous looking, and I don't because of what's happened. So to be telling me that I should identify myself as a white Latina is just so disrespectful to me. And while we're talking about white privilege and all that kind of stuff, I need you guys to remember that when you're talking to people that fit into this category that you've all created, do not disrespect their entire culture and their feeling of belonging to their community and how they were raised just because you want to push a political point, okay? So just make sure that you are not being insensitive to the Hispanic experience and trying to police who is Hispanic enough. And we'll get into more of that on the next episode. So just stay tuned, you guys, because that shit's gonna be lit as fuck as well. I have some shit to say about that, because you guys know I feel some type of way when people try to tell us how we can and cannot Hispanic. So stay tuned for next episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, share if you care. Let people know. Tell your Hispanic friends. You gotta listen to this one, okay? Help us out. Spread the word. And I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.